Hi, it's Miss Price.
And this is Miss Niebling.
And today we're going to talk about dialogue. We're going to talk about where we put dialogue in our story and how we put it in there and why.
Now, there are a lot of different reasons to include dialogue.
Now, dialogue is there to provide information in the story and to provide all kinds of different information. One of the keys, though, is to make sure that dialogue is purposeful. It's there for a reason.
That's right. And one of the reasons why we include dialogue is to describe the setting of the story. A lot of times when characters mention the place or the location they're at in the story, that's an easy way for the writer to give us a glimpse into the story. Now, it could be a place or it could also be a sense of time. So perhaps a time of day or maybe a nod to the fact that they're in a different century. Either way, you get to find out about the setting through dialogue.
Right, and another great thing to find out through dialogue is about the character. The way the character talks, the way other characters talk about that character, we know that tells us about character traits and what the character might be like. And that's a quick way to let us know if a character is brave or responsible is through their dialogue. And it also tells us the character's thoughts and feelings. You don't have to do that just through narrative. It's kind of like in real life. We tell each other through dialogue what we're thinking and how we're feeling. And that's the same thing you do in a story.
Now, the great authors realize that sometimes dialogue can be used to slow the reader down and to create a sense of suspense or really get the reader into the conflict in the story. So when you have a lot of dialogue in a really important part of the story, it might give that sense of suspense to what's going on. But just like sometimes dialogue can be used to slow the reader down, dialogue can also be used to speed the reader up and to actually move that story forward. If you have a lot of sentences of dialogue on a page, those are really quick sentences to read. Our brains and our minds can read through those sentences quickly, and that makes the story kind of move a little bit faster through different parts.
Yeah, and I always like to read dialogue because I know I'm going to get through that page a lot faster when I'm reading dialogue in a story. Dialogue is used to summarize as well. What a great way for a character to kind of remind us of something that's happened earlier and give us a real quick summary of that action.
So that's something that writers can use to really communicate in a different way to the reader.
Now, dialogue needs to be meaningful dialogue. We don't want to hear anything like the, hi, how are you? Oh, I'm fine, how are you? Great, I'm glad. You can summarize that in one narrative sentence by just simply saying, I greeted my neighbor. You don't need to give us that lazy kind of dialogue. We want dialogue to always move us forward, always be meaningful, and never wasted. Can you take your dialogue out of your story and your story still makes sense? Then you probably didn't need it. That dialogue has got to move your story forward.
Now, remember that dialogue can be used to really help us to understand characters better. So part of that is writing your dialogue in a way that we can actually visualize the character saying that dialogue. So it's a chance for you to develop each character's voice differently. Just as people are unique, so are characters, so their dialogue should reflect that. So if you have an older woman saying something in your story, her voice and the words that you choose to use in her dialogue should sound differently than a 4-year-old little boy's voice. So it's a chance for writers to really explore their characters and really show them differently to the reader.
Yeah, and I think another really great point, Miss Niebling, is to talk about how we want to make sure the characters are saying words that they would actually say for that time period, for that character. We don't want it to be contrived. We don't want it to be language that you would say, oh, she'd never talk like that. And so the words you use, be mindful of what those are.
Yeah, it should always ring true and it should never sound like fake.
Yeah, good point. Now there's two different types of quotations. As you see here, one is called direct quotations. These are where the character's actual words are coming out of their mouth. And so if you look at the example, it says, I hope class is easy. That's what Ryan is really saying. So we've put quotation marks around that, and then the said Ryan part isn't being said out loud, and so there are no quotation marks around that.
Just like there's direct quotations, there's also indirect quotations. And indirect quotations are really about a general thought or piece of dialogue from a person. So it's not actually reflecting what they said out loud. It's just letting us know that it does not require quotation marks because it was not actually stated out loud. So in the example, Ryan hoped that class was easy. That's letting us know what Ryan's hope was, but he did not actually say that out loud. So that's the difference between direct and indirect quotations.
Yeah, good.
Now, it's really important that when you are using dialogue tags, that you use a variety of them. Now, dialogue tags are the different expressions that we use to show the reader the voice of the character and what's going on, what emotion is being shared in that dialogue. Sometimes dialogue tags are called speaker tags, sometimes they're called expressions, but either way, you want to choose a variety of dialogue tags. So if the character is in pain, it's really helpful to say something like, Miss Price moaned. Or if she's really excited, you would want to say, Miss Price exclaimed. And that's really important to help us get to know what's going on in the story.
Yeah, and one thing we want to make sure is that you don't get rid of all your saids. There's really nothing wrong with using the word said. But if you do have the opportunity to tell me how character is feeling through a dialogue tag, take advantage of that opportunity.
If you use the word said over and over again with every single piece of dialogue in your story, it does get a little bit old. But when you want to emphasize what the character is saying and not necessarily how they say it, said is a great way to set up your dialogue.
Absolutely.
Now that we know about dialogue tags, we have to learn more about where we can actually include them in our writing. So sometimes you can have dialogue tags at the beginning of a sentence. So you would have the dialogue tag followed by the quotation. These are called introductory expressions because you're introducing the quotation with the dialogue tag. Then sometimes you have dialogue tags at the end of a quotation. We call these concluding expressions because you are concluding the quotation with a dialogue tag. Finally, you have those dialogue tags that are used in the middle of a thought or quotation. And these are called interrupting expressions because you are actually interrupting the quotation with a dialogue tag.
There are lots of different ways, and so we're going to take a look at some examples. So the first one is the introductory expression. And as you can see, we're going to start with a tag because it will introduce what Brooke is about to say. And she says, I love writing and communication arts, and so it introduces her talk.
Then we have the concluding expressions. So once again, you see the quotation first, followed immediately by the dialogue tag. So you'll see 3 different examples where Brandon, Jacob, and Max are each put in the dialogue at the end of the sentence.
Right. And in the last example are the interrupting expressions, and sometimes these can be a little tricky. So if we look at it in 2 different ways, the first one, Megan is saying just one thought, one sentence, and we're going to have Megan interrupt that one thought or sentence in an appropriate place. And so as you notice, it's all just one long sentence. But if you look at Tyler, he is having 2 sentences or 2 thoughts, and we're actually going to have him interrupt those thoughts in the middle.
Notice that when Tyler finishes his first thought, you use a period to end that complete thought. Then when he starts his next sentence, it's capitalized because it's a new sentence, new thought.
When you write, you want a variety of the different types of dialogue tags. Don't do all introductory or all concluding. We want a variety throughout the entire story.
That's the sign of a good writer, somebody who's able to mix it up for the reader to make sure that dialogue doesn't get old or robotic.
Now, dialogue isn't always easy to put in our writing, but we're hoping with a little practice you'll get used to it and you'll enjoy putting dialogue in your stories. Just follow the examples that we've given you today.
And that's it, guys. Thanks for listening.